FLM, wide open thinking, world-class work, and far-reaching results. Now with locations in Minneapolis, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Washington, D.C. A strategic marketing and communications company dedicated to serving clients who specialize in the business of agriculture and the life of rural communities.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Senior Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And some interesting things came out of Washington this week, a lot of really interesting tidbits kind of packed here and there. And first one we want to talk about is a Farm Foundation forum on the Farm Bill that was held Wednesday morning here in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club. Had speakers from the Heritage Foundation, the Environmental Working Group, and the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives. Phil, you were in attendance. I was kind of listening on an audio cast while I was sitting at my desk. Some interesting things came out of there.
Well, I think the most interesting part of, and very interesting actually, was part of the meeting was Chuck Connor. Everyone in agriculture knows very well. Chuck was on the Hill with the Senate Agriculture Committee for years. He's with the corn refiners for a while. And then he served for 8 years with the George W. Bush administration, where he was in the White House, and then later at USDA, Deputy Agriculture Secretary. He really was the point for ag policy in the Bush administration. Since then, he's been with the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives. So he's knows the gamut. He's from Indiana, also. A lot of buzz about him as a possible agriculture secretary.
Right.
So the room was packed over at the National Press Club. And Chuck had some very strong opinions about what's going to happen with the Farm Bill. And I think for a lot of our listeners who were like the current Farm Bill, with some tweaks here and there for commodities, probably would like what he had to say yesterday.
And Chuck was adamant about a few things. First one being that there will be another farm bill, and that an extension of this current policy that we're working under right now, he said, would not suffice in the long term.
Correct, and he said, well, you've got to address, there are some issues with other commodities. We know we've been reporting it with cotton, dairy, those. But Chuck also was emphatic that not only that there would be a farm bill, but it was going to be a farm bill that farmers would like. He called it farmer. He said it would be farmer friendly, user friendly, pro farmer. He used all those terms, and made clear that the Environmental Working Group and the Heritage Foundation, both of whom would like to see some major changes in farm policy, were not going to be successful.
So won't take too much of a deeper dive on that, just because we do have some other topics we'd like to get to. But we do have a couple of pieces online at agripulse.com if you're looking to take a little bit of a deeper dive on that Farm Foundation forum. Some interesting nuggets came out of there in terms of positioning for NCFC, EWG, and Heritage as well. It's probably worth your time to navigate on over and read a few of those. But Phil, the main thing that Congress is going to have to do here in these couple of weeks in December is to get some kind of funding mechanism to avoid a government shutdown at the end of next week.
Right.
So with that in mind, did we see any progress on that front here in these last couple of days?
Well, we haven't seen the actual bill or the continuing resolution, which is what they'll pass next week. But the stopgap bill, or CR, continuing resolution, that's currently funding the government expires next Friday. And the plan now is, for the Republicans in Congress, is to pass another CR to go into next year, so that they can then negotiate the rest of the fiscal 2017 spending levels with the president, the new president, President Trump. There's been some disagreement between the House and Senate on how long that continuing resolution should run. One chamber wanted March, the other one wanted May, but that should be resolved next week, and that's the main issue left for this Congress.
And let's shift gears here out of Washington and head to Trump Tower in New York City, which is really the talk of Washington right now, as a lot of meetings are happening as the Trump administration seeks to set a cabinet. Saw some names mentioned for nominations of transportation, health and human services, things of that nature this week. Still no news on a USDA secretary, EPA administrator, Food and Drug Administration head, anything like that. But we did see some names with agricultural connections head up to Trump Tower this week. Former Georgia Governor Sonny Perdue, a former veterinarian, was in Trump Tower, and North Dakota Democrat Heidi Heitkamp over from the Senate has a meeting with Trump and Pence on Friday. Recording this on a Thursday afternoon, so some interesting things that could be coming out of that. But Phil, we really don't know much about what the Trump administration is thinking in terms of a bona fide agriculture secretary, but we are starting to learn about some things that could have impacts on agriculture in terms of how they're arranging their administration.
Yeah, a couple of things I mentioned that we don't know about an EPA administrator either, but there's several. Trump has had several meetings with possible EPA administrators. They include Scott Pruitt, the Attorney General from Oklahoma. One thing they seem to all have in common is they are very pro fossil fuels. And so we'll keep an eye on that. I think there's going to be some big changes at EPA. We can be sure of that. The other thing that I find is interesting is the transition advisory team that's moved into the trade representative, USTR, U.S. Trade Representative's office, and the new Commerce Secretary, or the nominee for Commerce, Wilbur Ross. Trump seems very clear on carrying out his trade policy. The advisors that they're putting in place at USTR, for example, are steeped. The trade lawyers are steeped in trade enforcement cases and in China. They have experience in anti-dumping and countervailing duty cases. I think we can be sure that the new president intends to carry out his trade agenda, especially when it comes to enforcement and especially when it comes to going after China in particular.
So there's going to be some interesting things to watch here in this next week as Congress wraps up a funding mechanism, as the Trump administration continues to take shape. And we will be your home for all of that coverage as it relates to agricultural policy here at Agri-Pulse.com. But I think that's going to do it for this week's Washington Week in Review. For Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.